Alex, and you're watching Fox News Sunday. Here in the studio with me today is Texas Governor and presidential hopeful Dick Perry to discuss a problem of growing concern to many Americans, invisible immigration. Welcome, Governor.
Hi.
So in 2016, the illegal immigration of invisible persons into this country seems to be a hot topic. Now, you've been very strong advocate of securing the borders against invisible immigration. But also, there are some other issues about in-state tuition to invisible liability for government handouts, and of course, invisibles stealing good jobs from perfectly visible Americans. Can you define your invisible immigration policy here and now?
Well, securing the borders is the main issue, and it's the federal government's responsibility. In Texas, we've done a very good job of mobilizing our Texas Ranger Recons, our Parks and Wildlife Wardens, our Texas National Guard to stop this invisible threat before it can jeopardize the livelihoods and safety of the good citizens of the United States of Texas. On account of these efforts, we saw a 74% reduction of apprehensions. Well, we didn't see a reduction because, of course, people being apprehended were invisible, but you know what I mean.
Follow up with the 11 or up to, I don't know estimates as high as 30 billion.
Yeah.
11 to 30 billion invisibles. What do you do with them?
Yeah. Listen, there are a lot of smart people out there that'll figure that out.
Right. Well, let's move on then to another issue that you've been dealing with as the governor of Texas, sanctuary cities, because that is becoming an issue that is, well, it's not just ripe for this year, but
Yeah.
they are proliferating. Can you just explain for our viewers who may not be familiar with this concept what sanctuary cities are and why they pose such an enormous obstacle to fighting invisible immigrants?
Yeah, I think sanctuary cities are a federal security issue, and the federal government needs to deal with this. Basically,
And I think we have some photographs taken from Sanctuary City outside Austin to illustrate your point here.
yeah, thanks. So a sanctuary city is an area where policies are put into place that prohibit the prosecution of invisible. And if you look at other parts of the world that are also struggling with invisible immigration, say for instance Europe, you will see that sanctuary cities are really just a getaway to no-go zones, entire areas where invisible immigrants have made it unsafe or impossible for visible people to even enter.
And from the photographs we just saw, it looks like some of these sanctuary cities could even be no-go zones already. Not a single visible person in one of those pictures, yet just crawling.
Yeah, crawling.
With invisible people. It's certainly disturbing to think about. All right, joining us now live from Washington, D.C. is Harvard professor Dr. Hertzen Tube, migration and invisible person specialist and chairman of the Congressional Committee on Invisible Issues. Good evening, Doctor. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here.
Invisible people are a relatively new phenomenon in terms of scientific evolution and human history. Could you just give us a little scientific background on why these invisible people are coming into our country, stealing our jobs, and destroying the economy, are fundamentally and scientifically different from the average hard-working visible American?
Well, actually, most of my work in Congress has been to argue that invisible and visible people are fundamentally similar based on our scientific knowledge of the invisible phenomenon. You see, invisibility is the result of a dramatic mutation in the pigment melanin, which gives human hair, skin, and eyes their color. Scientists speculate that the advent of this mutation in recent decades, as well as its progressive proliferation around the world in human populations, is triggered by worsening conditions of pollution and environmental hazards which are contaminating the water and air supplies, particularly in third world countries and regions of industrialized poverty. Once the melanin pigment is mutated to ultimately absorb the light waves that are generally reflected to produce visibility, it is suspected that this trait can be genetically transferable to offspring. So ultimately, invisible people are in no way different from their visible counterparts except for this minor skin pigment mutation. In terms of their general humanity, all of the fundamental traits which make a person human, there is no essential difference between these two races. Even Pope Francis recently has issued statements that Catholic doctrine permits the invisible persons to enter heaven, statements calling for greater tolerance of invisibles. There is much we don't yet know concerning the science of invisibility, but it doesn't take a scientist to realize that these invisibles are human beings who deserve to be treated with dignity and respect.
All right, well, thank you, Doctor. Now back to you, Governor Perry. Let me ask you this. Recently, fellow Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump issued some pretty controversial statements regarding invisible immigrants, saying, and I believe the direct quote is, they are bringing drugs, they are bringing crime, they are rapists. What is your reaction to Mr. Trump's statement?
Well, I think it is very important to be very careful in throwing around concepts like rape. Because what we see is that many people in this country, particularly women folk, are using these types of concepts to justify terrible things, like, for instance, abortion. I think that it is important that we examine critically here what constitutes a legitimate rape. And in this case, to say that if a woman did not actually see the penis in the alleged rape, was it really rape? And what's also important for people to realize in regards to this issue is that even if it was rape, in the case of unwanted invisible penetration, the female body has a way of shutting that sort of pregnancy down. So whether or not invisibles are all rapists really has no impact on the issue of abortion in this country.
Perry, thank you so much for talking to us today at Fox News. We wish you the best of luck on your presidential campaign, and we'll be following with interest your efforts to combat invisible immigration in your home state of Texas. That's all we have today, folks. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the O'Reilly Factor right after this.
Those of you who have read The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells will recall that it is much more a social commentary on racism than an effective sci-fi novel. We focused on this social element heavily in the first portion of the video, but I'm going to follow that up with a few facts about the concept of invisibility as it relates to actual science. First of all, complete transparency is probably impossible for the human body. Much in the same way that you can still see a glass of water, the light passing through an invisible body would still cause a noticeable disturbance in the surrounding air. The second biggest issue in conceptualizing invisibility is human vision. We are able to see because images in the form of light are captured by our retinas. If this retina was invisible, then all light would have to pass directly through it, without leaving behind any images for the optic nerves to communicate to our brain. Ultimately, the most feasible prospect for human invisibility is not making the body transparent, but developing a chemical agent that would instead cloak the body in some sort of light-refracting substance. Thanks for watching our take on The Invisible Man, and don't forget to vote Donald Trump in 2016.
Deuces, y'all.